Bonjour tout le monde, welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast. On this week's show, I had the pleasure of speaking with Sheldon Fernandez, CEO at Darwin AI. Darwin AI is a really interesting company, and you're going to learn a ton about it. Before we start, a little bit about Sheldon. He's a seasoned executive and thought leader in the technical and enterprise communities. He's applied emerging technologies such as AI to the enterprise, first as his role as CTO at Infusion, which he started out of school with 5 partners and grew it to 600 people. Then at Avanade, that was acquired. The organization that acquired Infusion in March of 2017. He studied theology, which we spoke about, which was super interesting, and some interesting links to the world of AI. He completed his master's in that world. We spoke about Darwin quite a bit, its mission, this notion of really protecting our supply chain. So this notion of innovating and nearshoring. He obviously knows a lot about AI, having worked in the space for a long time. So we spoke about AlphaGo, the interesting breakthrough that DeepMind had a few years ago, the current landscape in the world of AI, and how they're using it at Darwin AI really to deliver value for their customers. We spoke about their interesting business model, this notion of hardware-enabled SaaS, and where he wants to take the company. It's really fascinating stuff. I really enjoyed my conversation with Sheldon. I hope you enjoy today's interview. Sheldon, real pleasure to have you on the show. I'm very curious to learn about Darwin AI and the really cool startup that you guys are building. Obviously, I want to say in the industry 4.0 space, but you'll probably correct me on that. Before we talk about your startup, which I think we'll spend a lot of time talking about, I want to talk a little bit about your background, particularly something I found in your education experience of having studied theology. So maybe 2 questions. One, like what interested you originally in theology? And then 2, if you see any learnings or anything that you apply in your day-to-day role today as CEO.
Yeah, no, great question, and what an interesting place to start. So, first of all, why did I do this? So, just for context for your listeners, I did an engineering degree as an undergrad, right? So, I went to the University of Waterloo. I did a computer engineering degree, and I was raised in a very conservative and loving Catholic family. And in my very last year at the University of Waterloo, I took a course on Jesus' life and legacy is what it was called. And it was basically asking the question of, look, there's the person that Christianity portrays and remembers and, canonizes. And then there's the historical person that existed 2,000 years ago. And we can use the tools of history to, uncover who this historical person was. And so I just really, that prompted some just very deep questions about religion and philosophy and the world that I didn't have, in my opinion, satisfactory answers to. So while I was starting my first company, I started a part-time degree, a master's degree in theology, really to get answers to these burning questions that I had as a young adult. How do you grapple with the problem of evil, for example? How do you understand other faiths if you're going to, posit that your faith is in some ways correct? And the irony is that, I often say studying theology for 3 years made me comfortable with ambiguity, and knowing that I wasn't going to know all the answers to the universe, and I was actually fine with that. So I sometimes say in another context that studying theology turned me into a philosopher. So that's why I did it. And as to your second question of, does it have relevance to my work and, stuff now? I would say yes, very much so in an indirect or peripheral way. My master's thesis, for example, was on neuroscience and metaethics. And in that thesis, I essentially asked the question, what can the latest brain science and machinery around the brain tell us about our foundational morality and where we get our questions of right and wrong from? And fast forward, 15 years from writing that thesis, the centerpiece of artificial intelligence today is neural networks, which is based on the biology of the brain. And one of the biggest questions that we as a society are grappling with is the ethical implications of these very powerful systems. And so the moral frameworks and ethical frameworks that I learned during that graduate degree very much inform the rigor and the ways I try to systematically think about ethical AI and our responsibilities in developing this really powerful technology. So, I started it purely out of interest, and like many things, you don't know where it's going to take you, but it was quite relevant to my eventual life at Darwin.
Yeah, it's a fascinating answer. I find something I never even thought about of like, hey, like we talk about, safe AI and aligning AI and one day it's going to kill us all, as a lot of people are saying.
Right.
But maybe a framework to study it is, rooted in theology, right? Starting about, like just ethics as a starting point. So I find that as a fascinating just way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for centuries, some of the greatest thinkers asked these questions about human beings, like what are the moral norms that should govern human behavior? How do we devise those norms? How do we instill them? How do we learn them? Well, you can imagine a lot of those lessons and insights are applicable to artificial entities. And how do we teach them? And what moral values should they reflect, and so forth. So yeah, it is very relevant.
Yeah, no, very cool, man. Very cool. So let's maybe switch gears just a bit and talk about Darwin. So, like, what led you to join the company, and then we'll talk about what the company does, also, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, story of Darwin begins about 5 years ago. And again, for context, I graduated from Waterloo a long time ago and started a software enterprise consulting company with four other classmates. And we actually began life on Wall Street writing trading systems for very large investment banks. Lehman Brothers was actually our first client. So we often joke we outlived our first client. Um, so I was the CTO for the majority of my time there, and my job was to obviously run the technical part of the organization, but it was also to bring new and emerging technologies to the enterprise about 3 or 4 years before the enterprise knew what those technologies were. And so around 2017, around the time that we were acquired, and we were acquired when we were about 700 people, so we grew that organization to a not insignificant size. Deep learning was really just becoming a powerful technology. What did it for me was when DeepMind, the Google subsidiary, created AlphaGo and beat the world champion at the game of Go. And as somebody who followed computer chess for many years, the game of Go was the next big thing that artificial intelligence was going to conquer. And that wasn't supposed to happen until 2035 or even 2050, in the opinion of many. So that DeepMind pulled this off in 2016. That's when I was like, okay, I need to pay attention to this. So I took Jeffrey Hinton's neural network course and I read about it and spoke about it. And I just became an advocate for, the fact that these technologies were going to be significant. That got the attention of a former colleague of mine who said, you should really talk to this group of academics at the University of Waterloo. And one of them was Professor Alexander Wong, who, in addition to being a professor, was Canada's research chair in AI. And his group was doing incredible things with deep learning, explainability, edge-based deployments, all this fascinating work. So I just inadvertently started contacting him and being in dialogue with him. And lo and behold, 4 months after, exiting my first company, we are running a second. Now, Darwin originally, our original intent was to bring a level of trust to AI development. And so the foundational technologies that my team developed around explainability and deploying to the edge, our vision was to codify this into a platform that other data scientists and developers could use to create robust and trustworthy networks. We were doing okay with that approach, and then the COVID, pandemic just really changed the world economy and changed a lot of things. So we pivoted into manufacturing. And what we do today, it's not something I would have thought about, a year ago or even 2 years ago. We basically have harnessed our technology to facilitate the automatic visual inspection of PCBs or printed circuit boards. So these are the little green circuit boards that go in everything from microwaves to televisions to drones to autonomous vehicles. And so basically, there's a significant portion of this manufacturing workflow that is still manual, that is still done by human beings. We've essentially brought a product to market to automate that visual inspection. And it's really topical because of what's happening in the world. There are a lot of companies that want to move the sensitive electronics manufacturing work back to North America because of what's happening in Asia and Taiwan and China and so forth. So it's a very topical offering, and kind of our focus area at the moment.
Yeah, there's many points to unpack. I just maybe one small parenthesis. You mentioned AlphaGo, and for those that don't know, there's a really good documentary on it. I think it's on Netflix, if I'm not
Oh
mistaken.
yeah,
Just speaking about the breakthrough. So I think in terms of like history, there's certain milestones. I think that year is one, and then 2023 is another one. So we'll chat about maybe AI again. But I find that fascinating. Slight pivot you mentioned, right? So going from trying to be an infrastructure player to one that's really at the application level with what you're building. It made me think of maybe my past life. I started my career as a company called Teledyne. It's like
yeah.
machine
I've heard.
vision.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
this is like the old school way of
yeah,
doing inspection with
yes.
cameras, but they had
Hmm.
built a lot of software. And this is like the early 2000s where I worked there. And I find that you're going to be using today's methods to do this kind of inspection, right? So
Yes.
maybe unpack the business model. Then do you provide only the software? Do you provide any kind of like hardware inspection? Like how does it work?
Yeah. So one of our big learnings, many AI companies, if you're going to bring value to an enterprise, and this is a hard learning for many AI companies, AI is maybe 30 to 40% of the total solution, right? It's the brain, but how you wrap that brain and the service you provide and so forth. So we actually had to spend about a year developing hardware to couple our offering with, right? So we have the hardware that does the visual inspection and does the high imaging of these PCBs. It required custom imaging algorithms. It required some real mechanical engineering know-how in the organization. And then we have the software that actually does the inspection and uses explainability and these advanced features to really make this worthwhile. And we charge for it in two ways. So there's an upfront cost for the hardware, and then there's a reoccurring license cost for the software every year. And that is what some of your listeners might recognize as the traditional SaaS model that we are kind of centralizing our revenue with. Yeah.
Yeah, what's the buzzword? Like hardware enabled SaaS? Like if I'm not mistaken, it's
Hardware
the
enabled SaaS. I haven't heard that one. I'm going to use it.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think I've heard that one recently, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Take it with a grain of salt, I would say. But yeah, fascinating model, which makes a lot of sense because the hardware component is not. It's yes, okay, once it's in place, but then the software piece, just like a Tesla, right? Like
Yeah.
will be continuously upgraded, and then customers should pay for that. In terms of use cases, like are there any initial industries or verticals that you beginning more traction on?
I mean, PCBs is the big one, right? Now, do you mean adjacent use cases, or you mean use cases within PCBs?
Within PCBs?
I see. I see. So there's two kind of target clients we have. The first are big, what are called EMS companies, electronic manufacturing service companies. These are companies that do this at scale for all industries. So these are not typical companies that the average tech person will encounter. These are companies like Celestica, Foxconn, Jabil. They're billion-dollar companies, and they do this at scale for everybody else. Then there are OEMs that do this as well, and they either develop their own PCBs either for proprietary reasons, right? There's special IP in them that they don't want to expose to another contractor, or for national security reasons. And so this is like Lockheed Martin, Google, SpaceX, and so forth. And so I would say right now, many of our EMS clients are seeing more work from aerospace because of the concern that defense suppliers have around outsourcing this outside North America, right? And if you look at what's happening in the world, it's just on point with a lot of the trends we're seeing.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day, an investor, and we were talking about key trends. And I think you mentioned one, Sheldon. I think you're right on. Is this notion of deglobalization, right? That's picking up steam and wanting to protect our supply chains more
Yeah,
and nearshoring, right? Whatever the term is.
yeah.
So I find you have an interesting tailwind when it comes to a trend to bet on, right? Companies wanting to do this near home and to do this at scale and cheaply, right? Which software will enable them to do. What is the benefit that you've seen that when you pitch your customers, are you pitching ROI? You're pitching in terms of like cost saving? Is it efficiency? What is the pitch look like?
Yeah, great question. So there's like first order benefits that are immediate, and then there's second order ones that, will manifest over time. So the first order benefit is there's a labor concern for them because this work is being done by older workers who are retiring, and they are having difficulty replenishing with younger workers. So with the system, they can detect things faster, cheaper, more accurately, and offset that labor concern. So it's a simple ROI calculation, right? How much does a worker cost me? How are you augmenting this? What's the amount of rework and scrap you're eliminating? What is the benefit of automating this process that wasn't automated before? And that's just an obvious one for them to test and to calculate the cost of the system versus their ROI. The second order benefit, and this is interesting, and it ties to Industry 4.0, is the digitization of that part of the process that was previously manual, right? So now that I'm taking a picture or multiple pictures of a PCB, every time I do an analysis, think of the amount of rich data that I'm collecting during that process, and think of the things I can do with that data. So right away, with enough data, they can start to look at things like line efficiency relative in a plant. Which lines are more efficient than others? Which plants are more efficient than others? Is there a part of the workflow where errors are being introduced at a greater level than other parts of the workflow? And then a new trend we're seeing is, can I take this data and feed it back into the design phase of the PCB process? So it's called design for manufacturability, is what the industry gurus call it. And so now when somebody's designing the PCB, can I have intelligence while they're doing it that says, hey, you're placing these two components next to one another, that may result in manufacturing inefficiencies down the road. Whereas if you did this instead, you would increase, your throughput. So those kind of potentialities are really attractive to a lot of our clients, and they're only now starting to think about them now that these systems are being put in place.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. Also, like, I imagine certain clients starting to think of like, what if we need to reimagine the whole line from
Yeah.
starting from scratch, right? Like a lot of the
Yes.
work, let's say that we've heard, companies like SpaceX are doing.
Correct.
What is the nature of the data that you're capturing, and how are you using neural networks, right? Beyond just visually inspecting, providing data back on defects, what other intelligence and algorithms are you bringing to bear in your solution?
Yeah, so we have a lot of proprietary IP that's baked into the solution. So obviously, we have custom foundational models for PCB detection. And I want to emphasize, it may seem like a simple computer vision problem. When you look at a PCB and you look at circuits and you look at the glare of the lighting and all that, there is a non trivial visual inspection challenge in doing that, even with the most advanced machine learning. But we do use neural networks for just the machine vision element of this. We have custom explainability that says, when you classify something as a defect, why did you classify that as a defect? And so being able to give an operator that insight is very important, because that feedback from them is really crucial in improving the system over time as it runs, right? The other really exciting element that we're doing, and I wrote a Forbes article about this last month, is we use generative AI, which of course is a big buzzword at the moment, but we've used it before it was even termed generative AI. One of the challenges in this vertical is getting what we term negative data. So this is data of things that are bad. If you want to, for example, detect a bad component, or what they call a tombstone. Okay, this is a thing that the PCB people use. Tombstone is when a part is literally, put up on the board instead of lying flat, so it looks like a tombstone. You need data to train the AI to look for that. The problem is they're already manufacturing things at such a high efficiency rate that you don't have a lot of examples of things that are bad. And so we've used generative AI in clever ways to generate synthetic data for these various scenarios, so we can train the main AI to really detect this at a very high level of efficiency.
Yeah, that's
So
fascinating. Yeah.
it's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it harkens back to the way Google trained AlphaGo, right? It just made itself play a bunch of like billions of
Yeah.
AlphaGo
Yeah.
games until it got better at, like a general sense playing the game.
Right.
Um, So I imagine a PCB board, and I won't get into the details because have no idea. So I'm going to appear dumb, but probably sounds very complex, right? Like you're looking at lighting, you're looking at positions, you're looking at all the circuits. This complex ability to, this ability to detect complex defects. Are there other use cases beyond PCB boards that you're starting to play with?
Great question. Not at the moment, right? I mean, a company of our size really needs to focus its resources on a particular use case. There's probably a half dozen adjacent use cases where the technology could be applied with limited effort, and with which we will likely explore after probably our next fundraise. So these are things like EV batteries, e-textiles, semiconductors. We had somebody actually in China approach us today about using it for footwear, if you can believe it or not. Looking at imperfections on footwear. I'm not sure how they found us. So there's probably a half dozen where you can take the foundational stuff we've done and with a little bit of rework get it working in that use case. And that's something we'll look at after probably our next fundraise.
Yeah. What do you think about Industry 4.0, like as the term, but more broadly the sector you're operating in?
Yeah.
Like it seems like obviously there's a lot of big players, probably a lot of medium players that you mentioned, so like or where the general public's less familiar with. How advanced is I don't want to say digital transformation, but the adoption of digital technologies like a Darwin? How advanced are we in this sector?
It's getting there. It's still a slow moving industry, like many industries. Um, think of all the complex processes that are involved in manufacturing, well, really anything, but particularly electronic components, safety standards, regulatory standards, processes that work, that are ingrained, they've been doing this for 30 years. So it moves, but it moves like many things slowly and with a lot of evidence. I will say that with the rise of ChatGPT and the like, what we are seeing is that many of the executives who previously dismissed AI or were skeptical about it, you got to think now their spouses are asking them about it, their children are asking them about it, so they suddenly see this now in some nebulous way as a step change technology that they have to understand. So, we're seeing a greater openness to these technologies and almost a fear that if they don't really embrace this, they will be obsolete. So that's helping move things along. But it's enterprises move slowly. And so, you have to do it with a lot of encouragement, a lot of, points of proof points and that type of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, ask your sales team, include a slide on ChatGPT,
Oh,
just
yeah.
just to say this is the similar type of technology that we're building. I never thought of that, potential. Obviously, even in the tech world is, like talking about ChatGPT, it feels like it's such a revolutionary technology that's just appeared, or I have to say, appeared faster than most people thought. Just like the previous point you mentioned, Sheldon,
Yeah.
but it's like how it's going to also force more, even the staunchest, most, slowest moving industries to think twice about, hey, this stuff is kind of important to
Yes.
know and include in your strategy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
How big do you want to take your company? Like, would you have a bigger ambition? Like right now, I know that you guys just raised, like around back in December. Any
Yeah.
thoughts about, like more long-term vision and how big you want to take Darwin?
I mean, it's a great question. I think if you look at our kind of mission now, it's to transform manufacturing by instilling trust in artificial intelligence, right? So I would love to be, when people think of, manufacturing, and manufacturing is often not seen as a quote unquote sexy industry. I think what you have to remember is that it is the industry that, on which almost every other industry is based. If you don't have the physical goods to go to space, to, mine, resources, to fly aircraft, like none of this stuff happens without something like manufacturing. So we want to really push that forward through artificial intelligence. And I think a lot of the themes of doing so are attractive to us. I mean, we're Canadian like yourself, so there's a benevolence, I think, to how we think about the world, and the more efficient usage of resources, for example, think of the amount of waste you eliminate by something as simple as our offering. And if I extrapolate that across the entire manufacturing workflow, hey, are there ESG goals that we can meet doing that? So we want to take this as big as we possibly can get. We believe this is a transformative technology. We're seeing it, and it's just really fun to be able to create something that disrupts an industry and does it in a good way. So I think we want to be as ambitious as we possibly can with that kind of impetus.
Yeah, very cool, man. Very cool. And now, 5 years into your journey, like, what anything you wish you would have known at the start of taking over as CEO? Like, any lessons you're like, with hindsight?
I mean, gosh, so many things, right? I would have invested in Zoom right before the pandemic. I would have bought a ton of toilet paper and a Peloton right away. I mean, of course, there's always things that, with hindsight, you can look at with perfect, clarity. I think some of the big ones for me are, they often say that the hallmark of an entrepreneur is persistence, and the ability to just really persist through difficult times. We went through. If you think of what many founders have gone through in the last 5 years, it includes a pandemic. It includes a war in Europe that's ravaged most of the global economy. It's included, the SVB implosion, a pending recession. Like it's not a fun time to be a founder at the moment. And I think what you learn is you can just see your way through it, and harden yourself as a result of the experience. Those that make it through it will really have an opportunity in front of them. And so I don't know if it's hindsight, but like the advice I would give my younger self, in addition to probably just doing yoga and stretching and keeping in mind you're going to be old one day, is, hey, just persist. Like, never get too low when things are bad, and never get too euphoric when things are high. Keep a level head. And it's hard sometimes in the whirlwind of everything to think about that, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I think that's very wise advice, Sheldon, and I think maybe a great way to kind of cap off the interview. I think there's probably end on a nice high point. Maybe final question for you, Sheldon: if people want to get in touch, learn more about what you're building and continuing to build at Darwin, what's the best way?
Yeah, great question. So they can go to our website, darwinai.ca, and our website's fully up to date. I'm most active on LinkedIn from a business standpoint, so LinkedIn is probably the best way. You can just look me up. Twitter, I'm on Twitter, and I tweet a reasonable amount, but LinkedIn is probably the best mechanism. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, continued success, Sheldon. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. If you want to learn more, check out thepnr.com.